Okay, guys, let me turn up this speaker here. Okay, so if you guys want to say anything, ask. If you got questions, ask. All right, so it seems a little bit lit up here. I've got my light shining on the car, but I've got a table full of stuff here. What are we going to do today? What we're going to do today is we're going to replace our brake rotors and we're going to replace our brake pads. What I've got here are old rotors from the right side of the vehicle, and I've got new rotors and pads that we're going to install on the left side today. So we're going to do the left side brakes today. Last week on Thursday, I just kind of came in and I just did the right side because I could. I had the time to do it. But let's take a look at what we've got here. Two things that we've got here that I want to show you guys today. We've got brake fluid. And I know there was a section there on brake fluid that you guys could have looked at. I didn't give you guys a test on the brake fluid, okay? I opened it up. It was in the Electude braking section. And so it spoke briefly about the characteristics of brake fluid and how important it is. And it is important, okay? We want to make sure that brake fluid can last a long time. It's stable over a long period of time. So by stable means it's not going to lose its ability to do what it has to do, which is produce pressure hydraulically, okay? So we want to make sure it lasts a long period of time. It has to stay stable over a long period of time. It has to be compatible with all sorts of rubber and all of the braking components. It has to have a very high boiling point. It has to have a very low freezing point. That means that like minus 40, it can't freeze, because if it freezes, there's a problem, okay? If it boils too quickly when it gets hot, that's going to be another problem too, because one of the things I was discussing this morning was vapor lock. If it boils at a low temperature, we're going to get those air bubbles in the braking system, and that's going to reduce our hydraulic pressure. So two types of brake fluid that I have here. I'm just going to show it to you because this one here says .3. So .3 brake fluid, okay? And then this one, .4. Now, if you're looking at them side by side, the only difference that you're going to notice is that this one here boils at 205 degrees Celsius. This one here boils at 230 degrees Celsius, right? So the difference between a .4 and a .3 fluid, there's not much difference, but the boiling point for the .4 is a lot higher. So most of the manufacturers today are either using a 3 or a 4, and it doesn't matter. You can mix them. So you can add 3 to 4, you can add 4 to 3. They're compatible. What you can't do is use 3 or 4 with 5, or 5 with 3 or 4. You can't mix it. But you're not going to find a .5 brake fluid in a regular parts store. So if you're going to Canadian Tire, your local auto parts store, you're not going to find a .5. .5 is a different type of fluid. It's silicone based, whereas this one, okay, this is fluid or an oil that's hygroscopic, so it actually absorbs moisture. The silicone stuff doesn't really absorb too much moisture. And the .5 stuff, the boiling point is even higher. So a lot of people that race cars obviously use them. The cars that can go incredibly fast will use like a .5, right? They wouldn't have a .3 or a .4 or something like a, you know, a Chiron, for example. If you guys saw the kind of crazy testing they do on their calipers, okay, they would use a .5 simply because it has a much higher boiling point, because they don't want the brakes to fail at a lower temperature, okay? So .3, right, or .4, that's what you could use, and they're interchangeable, okay? Now, is there anything on this one? Yes. What's neat about this is it says, if we just kind of zoom in there, it says for ABS and disc and drum brakes. I know it's not focused when I come that close, but guys, whether it's .3 or .4, the ABS system doesn't need any special fluid. It just needs regular, good old .3 or .4 brake fluid. That's it. So nothing special needed, okay? An ABS system works with regular brake fluid, okay? Done. I got this thing, but we're not going to use it, okay? I'm not going to show you how to do it because what's happened on my cars, there's a slight little crack in the rubber, and I'll show it to you on the other side. So there's a slight little crack in the outside rubber sleeve but I can't seem to get the fitting off on this end. And so I'm not going to run through that procedure today. Once I figure out how to get this off, maybe I'll show you at a later date. But for today, we're not going to do it. So this here is just a brake hose. And you can see what it does, right? It flexes, right? And why does it flex? Because the wheel has to turn in and out, and it also has to go up and down with suspension. So there's a brake hose. What's it do? Transmits fluid. That's all it does. It's a passage for fluid, okay? So you can see that it's got a hole on both sides, and obviously if I blow through it, right, blowing here, air is going to come out here. It's just a passage for fluid. Got two of those. Let's take a look at the rotors, all right? So brand new pads. I'm going to take out my handy dandy brake pad thickness gauge, and let's just measure the new pads. I'll show you. We've got 3 green, and we know it's in the green because it's brand new. Let's take a look at how thick this sucker is. These brake pads, because they're in the front, okay, they're as thick as the widest gauge on here, which is this one. And it is 12 millimeters, okay? So these brake pads, if we're measuring them across here, 12 millimeters thick. Okay, so let me just make it nice and flat. And you can see it's the same size as that thickness gauge. 12 millimeters is what these brake pads are because they're front pads. I think when we measured the back pads on this car, I think they were 10. So they weren't quite the top one, right? They weren't the top one. They were somewhere in between. I think it was this one here, which was 10. But again, these are brake pads, a lot more braking action occurring in the front. They're going to be not only physically bigger this way, from here to here, okay, but physically bigger from here to here in thickness, okay? Inside pad with the clip for the piston and the outside pad. And they both got the anti-rattle, anti-vibration little kind of sticker on there, okay? So that is there for a purpose. It serves a purpose, okay? It's anti-rattle and anti-vibration, okay? And it's on top of the actual pad, all right? So backing plate, and then you've got the actual lining. So lining, backing plate, and then you've got that anti-rattle or anti-vibration pad that's stuck onto it, okay? New rotors. This thing's got a good weight. The new rotor, if you're looking at the color, it's not shiny. So when we looked at the video with that woman replacing the back brakes on the Volvo, when she replaced the rotor, she replaced it with like some shiny looking brakes, okay? So what I always try and do is I always try and get the best possible components when we put it into the car, whether I'm working on my car or I'm working on a customer's car. And the reason I do that is, look, if you're going to be saving money with me anyhow because you're not paying labor, let's put some good quality parts in. And if you're going to go to the dealership, they're not going to put anything but good quality parts. So these are Zimmermann rotors, okay? And Zimmermann makes rotors basically for Volvo. So these could possibly be the exact same rotors I could go to the Volvo dealership and purchase. The only difference is my box says Zimmermann, it doesn't say Volvo. And why does it look so funky and it's not shiny? Because on the surface, on this surface here, on this surface here, on the entire surface of this rotor, front and back, okay, they are zinc coated. So it almost looks like spray paint, which it kind of is. It's a coating that goes on and they kind of bake it on, and that's zinc. And that zinc is there to help to protect the metal. So that's what zinc is. It's like an anti-rust barrier, I guess, that they put on top of the steel, okay? So there's the new rotors. Here's the old pads. Now these pads were from the right side, so they were not too bad. So if we were to measure them, they were actually kind of in the yellow. So if we're looking at these pads, we're actually at the yellow, and we weren't even at the lowest yellow. We were just kind of like in the middle yellow, all right? Actually, no, we're at like the top yellow. So we were just below the very first green. But if we're looking at it here, we measure this pad. And again, if I do this, and I show you the thickness of the thickness gauge, these pads were at 6 millimeter. So when we start at like 12, 6 millimeter means it's down 50%. So these pads weren't too bad. I could have still continued to use them. But when we look at the left side pads, what you're going to notice is that they're quite warm, okay? So pads, old rotors. Now, if you guys remember the last time that I was in class, I tried to just kind of clean up the rotor a little bit. And what I did was I put it on the machine, I put it on the brake lathe to clean up the surface of the rotor. When I cleaned up the surface of the rotor, I cleaned it up, but you can kind of see like the cut marks here, right? What I didn't have at the time was something to buff the rotor. So there's like a rubber buffering anti-vibration strap that goes around the rotor. I just didn't have one for the machine. So when the machine cut it, if you're looking at the surface kind of has a rough finish to it, okay? But what I did do was I managed to machine it down nice and straight, nice and smooth. It's just that the surface, look at the surface. That's a terrible surface for brake pads, all right? But I just tried it kind of quickly. Oh, Lord. I'm just gonna turn the camera around to face the car, and I'll do the work, but we'll do the work together. You guys will at least get a demo of this. And because this video is being recorded, you can look at it at a later date. I'll post it in the classroom. So let me just set this up. I'm probably gonna lose the camera. So let me just swing it around and set it all up, and we'll do a front brake job on this car, all right? We didn't lose the camera. That's great. Okay, so the car is ready on the hoist. We're going to bring the car up, and we're going to do a brake job on the car. All right, vehicle's going to come up. Okay, so vehicle's coming up. I'm going to bring it up higher so that the tire is about chest height. So let me just bring it up a little bit more. I will take this tire off. Okay, that's a comfortable height for me. About chest height. That's a comfortable height for me to work. Get my safety glasses on, guys. Let's take this wheel on. Now you notice what I'm doing? All of my hardware that I'm going to take off, I'm going to put on the hoist arm. Okay? Why am I putting it on the hoist arm? Because I'm protecting my hardware, I'm protecting my nuts, okay, and my bolts. When you've got stuff that you're taking off on a vehicle, you don't want to leave it on the floor. If you leave it on the floor, it's going to get kicked around, it's going to get lost. So I always put on the hoist arm. If you're working under the vehicle that's being jacked up, and it's on a set of jack stands, we always put the nuts and bolts in between the stand legs, okay? So then that way we protect our hardware, okay? Wheels off. Again, I've got the wheels. You guys didn't notice this, but when I took the last bolt off, I just kind of applied some pressure that way to keep this wheel kind of hanging on the hub of this. So let's take it off. It's off and on the ground. Now, one of the things that I did to this vehicle on Thursday was I also replaced the front wheel bearing. So when I pull this rotor off, you guys are going to see a nice shiny wheel bearing. I honestly thought that to do the wheel bearing was going to take much longer than it took me. It only took me about 40 minutes to replace that. I really should have recorded it, but we weren't doing anything with suspension and driveline specifically, so I didn't record it. But again, it only took me 40 minutes. I thought it was going to take me a couple hours. I was quite surprised at how accessible it was, and to tell you the truth, I was more shocked that the bolts didn't need to be heated up or anything. But again, I'm working on a Volvo and I do know better. A lot of their hardware is very good quality hardware. So nothing was seized and everything came out pretty good. So let's get to work. Now, let me just bring this over and let me show you what I've got here. So you guys can see this in the frame now of the video. I've got all my tools set up on my cart. And I set this up prior because I know the job that I'm doing. So I've got everything that I need is right here for this particular job, right? So I've got my side cutters that I'm going to use to take the spring off. I've got my Allen keys, my complete Allen key socket set here, right? Allen key or hex, right? Or 6-point. Okay, so those are my Allen keys, 6-point, right? Sockets. Okay. I've got my wrenches that I'm going to be using. And what I've done is I brought a 9-inch ratchet, and then I've got this one. And you can clearly see that this one's a little bit longer, right? So I've got a 9-inch ratchet here, and this one here is probably double. This one's probably an 18-inch ratchet. The handle is 18 inches. And that's going to give me a lot more torque for loosening and also for tightening some of these bolts. Because there's 2 bolts in the back of this rotor that holds the caliper bracket on. And they're not very big, but I need to make sure that I tighten them up pretty good, okay? Could I tighten it up with this? Yeah, I could. But I use a lot less effort with something like this, especially to take it off, all right? I've also got my electric ratchet, which I'm going to use to pull stuff on and off just to make the job a little bit quicker. And then I've got this. And why do I have this? I've got this simple slotted screwdriver only for the bolts that hold the caliper to the bracket, because I might have to just kind of use this to pry stuff on, all right? Wire brushes here, so that I'm going to clean stuff up, all right? When I pull the pads off, I'm going to clean up the surface where the pads kind of slide in and out, just to make sure that's all okay. And then we're also going to lubricate it. And why do we lubricate it? Because if we're going to put the pads in, let's put a little bit of lube on it so that it slides nice and freely, all right? Not only will it slide nice and freely, but with the lubricant on the pads and where the pads slide, it will prevent that area from rusting. And so that's why we're going to put the lubricant on it. All right, let's do this. Okay, so I'm going to start pulling this off. First thing that I've got to do is I've got to remove the spring, right? So we've got the anti-rattle spring right here. And I'm just going to take it off with my side cutter. And I'm just going to grab it with my, now I'm not cutting it with my side cutters. I'm just kind of grabbing it. And there's my spring out already. So there's my spring, my anti-rattle spring. So what it does, guys, is this kind of holds the caliper in place, prevents it from doing one of these, okay? The back of my caliper caps, I've got to take them off. And I've showed you that in the back, and I'm going to show you again. I've got the 2 caps off, right? So there's the 2 caps. Back of my boot, and that boot protects my bolt. That's the slide, the bolt that the caliper slides on. Inside here, I've got my 2 Allen key drive bolts. So I'm going to use my Allen key. At the right size. And I'm going to loosen them first. So I'm going to loosen them first with this, and then I'm going to put my electric ratchet on it. It's loose. Okay, so got it loose. Make sure my ratchet is going in reverse. And let's take these bolts out. Pull them out, it's out completely. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my screwdriver, I'm just going to slide the bolt out a little bit more. I know you guys can't see what I'm doing on this bolt, but all I'm doing is I'm making it slide right out so that we can slide this caliper off. Another bolt in the back here. Now I'm going to just get underneath. I'm just going to pry that bolt out a little bit so that everything clears. Good. Caliper's gonna come off. Caliper's coming off. And when it's coming off, it's coming with the inside brake pad. You guys know that because it's got that clip. So, brake pad's out, okay? You can see that there was fresh lube. I mean, I try and service this whenever possible. I did do a quick service to it, like when I inspected this a couple weeks ago, all right? But when I was doing the tutorial for you guys, if we checked this, the brake pads on this side were a little bit lower. Now, let me see if it was the outside one. Yeah, it was the outside one. This one wasn't too bad, okay? So there was some material left. There was lots of linings left, okay? But you can see that groove right here. You see that groove right there? That groove right there is from the rust buildup on the rotor. Rust buildup on the rotor leaves a groove in the pad. Let's measure this. This is the one that was the lowest pad that I found. If I pull it out, if you remember, the right side pads were okay. They're at 60%. This one here, when I measure it, so 60% kind of represents this one, the top yellow one. Okay, so the thickest yellow one. This one was on the lowest one. So if we were to measure this brake pad and I put this right beside it, you can see that it's about as thick as the lowest yellow. Okay, it's actually a little tiny bit lower than the lowest. So it's kind of, is it in the red? Let me just take a look. Just kind of above the red and just kind of below the yellow. So kind of in between the last yellow, which is this one, and the first red. All right, so we're changing it. Okay, pads are out. Calipers out. All I have to do now is take off the bracket, and this bracket holds on the brake caliper. So let's get that bracket out. And again, I'm going to use this tool just to loosen it, and then I'm going to use the electric ratchet to take it off. Just makes things easier. So what am I going to do? I'm just going to break the torque. Good. So I broke the torque with my long ratchet. Now, my air ratchet will do the job. That's one. Hope you guys can see. Yeah, get out of the way. Second bolt is out. Now I know that they're loose. So because I know that they're loose, I'm just going to unscrew them by hand, okay? Caliper bracket is out. On the inside of my caliper bracket, I also have an additional bracket on this car. And this bracket here is part of what's called the steering stop. So there's a steering stop on this car that prevents the wheels from touching the inside of this. All right, so we're going to take it off. 6mm bolt. 6mm bolt, okay, with a 10mm head. Done. That's out. And that's the only thing that holds the rotor. You can see that the rotor is loose now. So anything that holds the rotor to mine. Okay, so now, what do you have underneath? You got a nice shiny new wheel bearing. And if you look at this rotor surface, I didn't try and clean it up. Okay, but you see how shiny the rotor surface is? Okay, it's kind of glazed over. Very, very normal. Once you start applying the brakes, it's going to get glazed over. It's just going to glaze over. That's just the way it is, all right? So what I did, like I told you guys, was in here, I had a bearing. And that bearing was making noise. It was making not a lot of noise, but it was making enough noise that I recognized that it was the bearing that was bad. And so I changed the bearing. I went to my supplier and I got one of these bearings, okay? And again, here's what I'm going to tell you. This manufacturer, I always tell people this. People say, oh, vehicle parts, especially for the Europeans, they're expensive. But I'm going to tell you this right now. This manufacturer, okay, that manufacturer makes the original wheel bearing for this car. So when Volvo needs a wheel bearing, they don't manufacture their own. They give the manufacturer the specifications that they need, and they say, okay, make us the wheel bearing. You know what? This company makes it. So if I was to go to Volvo and I was to buy a Volvo wheel bearing, I'm getting the exact same bearing as what was in this box, okay? But the box says Volvo on, okay? So this is the original equipment manufacturer. Everybody knows that. So here's the old bearing. So the old bearing is complete. It's like a complete assembly. So the bearing is inside here, right? So this gets bolted to the knuckle, okay? And then this round part here spins with the wheel. So it just kind of spins with the wheel. If you guys were here, I would literally make you guys do this, okay? You can't hear it, but when I'm listening to it, not only can I hear it, I can feel it. And it's very tight, all right? So there's the old bearing that I replaced the other day. That's just the inside of it there. There's 4 bolts that hold it on. We've got to remove the drive shaft that goes in here. And there's the hub. This is where the rotor that we're going to bolt the rotor to today. That's where it gets bolted to, okay? One little bolt right here, okay, holds the rotor to this hub, all right? And you can clearly see the 5 holes where the wheel bolts go into, right? So the wheel bolts go into this, right? So my wheel bolts get bolted into this, all right? And this is what holds the rotor on. This is what holds the wheel on. So this spins with the wheel. And if this is noisy in any way, as soon as you start driving, you're going to hear it. On my particular car, it took probably about, you have to get up to about 60 kilometers an hour and start to make noise. At about 120, 140, it got quite noisy. I know that's, you know, exceeding the speed limit, but that was about the speed that it got quite noisy. My son drives a car, so if it was me, I'd probably drive it for a few more months, but why not change it? I've got to do this for you guys anyhow. So this was the wheel bearing that we changed. All right, so new wheel bearing, new rotors going on now. Splurging on this car. Okay. Now, the only thing that I did not do, and the only reason I didn't do it, is because I wanted you guys to see what I did. New wheel bearing. We're going to put on a new rotor. The rotor's over here. You can see a bit of it here, okay? What I'm going to do before I put these two together, take a little bit of my copper slip, okay? Synthetic lubricant. It's going to run it right here. Just around, right here. This is the area on the vehicle, okay, where the rotor always gets stuck onto the hub. So we always put just a little bit of lubricant right here, and that's all we need. Normally, all of the bolts, all the holes here, I would lube them up, but these bolts are so great and I've lubed them up prior, I don't need to add any additional lubricant. So by adding lubricant to the bolts, it prevents them from seizing. But these things came out and there was already lubricant on them. I mean, I can apply a little bit if I need to, but there was already lubricant on the bolts, so I didn't have to worry about it. And they're in great shape. See, they're not rusty at all, right? Super, super shape. Now, I'm going to put the rotor on, and then I'm just going to put the bolt in to hold the rotor on to the hub. The hub has a hole right here for that 6 millimeter bolt, and I'm going to do that right now. So, just going to go holes. Yes. Now, this 6 mil bolt is definitely going to get a little bit of lube, which is a scrap. Let's stop. Assembly here. I'm going to flip the direction of my ratchet by turning this here. Right? going on rather than coming off. Okay, so now my rotor's on. So what I'm going to do before I put this back together, this area here, where the pads slide, I'm just gonna take a wire brush. I'm just gonna clean it up, okay? So I'm just gonna put it on the ground. Give a quick wire brush, and you guys will see the results. And it doesn't take very much to get this done. It's quite quick. It didn't take very long, did it? So take a look. I've cleaned this area here, okay? And I've cleaned this area here where the pads are gonna slide. Gotta get the bolts on, but give me a minute, guys. My glove broke. Let me just change this glove. Okay, rotor's on. Your glove is on. Bracket for the back with the bolts. Caliper bracket's going to go back in. Let me just go under the car so I'm out of the way and you guys can see, okay? So I'm just going to catch these two bolts here. 1, 2, they're caught, and I'm going to use my electric ratchet just to kind of zap it up, and I'm going to hand tighten it, okay? One. I'm just going to take my long 18-inch ratchet. Just going to use this just to snug it up, okay? And guys, that is me checking the torque on, all right? That is me using this long ratchet just to make sure it's nice and tight. And if I could, and I didn't have one of these, this was the only size I had, I could do the exact same thing with this. It's just I'm going to have to exert a little bit more force, that's all. So if I put a 9-inch on it, all I'm going to do, put a little bit more force on the handle just to make sure that these bolts are nice and tight, okay? Is there a torque spec for it? Of course there's a torque spec for it. I don't know the torque spec, and we could use a torque wrench on it, but I just know how tight it feels when you put it on, I guess just through experience. But honestly, it's really as tight as I possibly can make it, all right? And that's how I tighten those bolts and hold the bracket on here, all right? Once you've got it, then you rotate. Brake pads. Brake pads. They slide in this area here. So they slide right here. Okay, they're gonna slide right in this area here, all right? They're gonna slide in this area here. What am I gonna do? I'm gonna add a little bit of lubricant to the area where the pad slides. So this is gonna be the surface where it touches the part on the bracket that it slides on, and I'm gonna add some lube. So again, I'm not adding an excessive amount of lube. I'm just gonna add just enough lube so that it's lubricated. That's it. That's all I'm gonna do, all right? Let me get this a little bit closer. All right, let me show you. We're just gonna do a little bit of lube right here, okay? So the pad, where it slides, is gonna touch here, and it's also gonna touch here, and that's what I've done. Okay, I've added a little bit of lubricant, slide it into my holder. Next thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna back off my piston. Remember what I told you guys? When we've got worn pads, the pads get thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner. The piston has to walk out of the caliper body. So it's coming out of the caliper body, it's gotta walk out. We've now gotta press it back in. And I'm gonna do exactly what this lady did in the video, which is break the bleed screw, which I normally never do it. But by breaking the bleed screw, at least then I'm gonna get some fresh brake fluid into my system, all right? So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you what I do. And the reason I'm going to do it this way is so that no air can now enter into my brake fluid. So I'm not going to get any air getting into my hydraulic system. So this is what I'm going to do. I've created something special. So I've got this thing right here. And all this is a regular water bottle. You guys can all see this, okay? And I've got a tube. And that tube goes into my fluid. So that means if my tube is going into my fluid, no air can enter into my hydraulic system. This tube is going to go on the end of my bleeder screw, and then I'm going to squeeze the piston back, and I'm hoping that the camera will pick up. I don't think it will though, but you will see the fluid coming out into this bottle, and you'll see a slight amount of bubbles coming out because I'm going to be pressing back, not too quickly, but fairly quickly to squeeze the piston back into the caliper. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to break my bleeder screw. So what I mean by break the bleeder screw is I'm not going to physically break it. I'm just going to crack it loose. When I crack it loose, fluid should come out. Now, in order for me to crack it loose, I've got to kind of bolt it up. I've got to kind of secure it. It's gonna loose. It's gonna be cut right tight. So let me see if I can hold it. So I crack it loose. So once I crack it loose, guys, my bleeder screw will allow fluid to come out of it. But I've tightened it back up. So right now, I don't think you guys can see this. Let me see if I can bring this camera a little bit closer. Now, if I lose the camera, guys, I will reset it, okay? Okay, so let's see if I can shine more light on this. The right angle with the light. Okay, so you can see the bleeder screw right here, okay? Not sure how I'm going to do this, but I'll figure it out. So here's the bleeder screw right here. I'm kind of standing in the way of this light over here, but if you guys could notice, a little bit of fluid has already come up. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this bottle. I'm going to put this hose on the end of my bleed screw. If I do this, it's now on the end of my bleed screw. Okay? I'm going to hang this bottle. Strap. Let's see how I can do this. My strap. Yep. And then this hose is going right over my bleed screw. Now, because I've already cracked the bleed screw loose, now I can use a wrench. And by using a wrench, I don't have to worry about the socket fitting over it. So now look, just loosened it. Notice there's no fluid leaking out right now because the fluid is going through my tube and going into that fluid, which is oil, okay? I've got oil in there. Now I'm going to take my large slip jaw pliers and I'm going to squeeze my piston back. So I've got the piston right here. That's better. I wish I had all the right lighting and all that stuff in here, guys. It's just, hey, this is what I'm working with. It's what I've got. So now you guys can see the bleeder screw. You can also see the piston right here. I'm going to squeeze that piston back up into the caliper housing with my large slip jaw pliers. Notice no fluid is leaking out. Nothing's leaking out. It's going through the tube, going into my fluid. So I'm not introducing any air. Now, jaw pliers. Just going to set it up so that it's set up properly. And watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to squeeze my piston back into the caliper housing. And I'm literally watching to make sure that no fluid is coming out of that hose. And I'm squeezing my piston back. And I'm looking into my fluid to make sure that right now, fluid is coming out of my hose and into my bath. So let me just undo this a little bit more. I don't think it was loose enough. Good. So now I'm going to squeeze my piston back in. And by taking off or loosening this bleeder screw, it makes it a lot easier for me to squeeze this piston back in, because now I don't have the fluid pressure behind it. And I can see my fluid coming out. I'm not seeing any air, which is great. I can see my fluid level coming up in my bottle too, which is awesome. Good. Now I've got to make my jaws a little bit smaller. So I'm going to slip it one more rung. Okay. Now my jaws are a little bit smaller, and now I can finish squeezing my piston back into my caliper body. I'm still squeezing it. I'm just looking to make sure that everything is okay. I'm seeing fluid fill up in the bottle. Look at that, guys. No mess. My fluid has gone through the hose into the bottle in the back, and I have not introduced any air at all. Now, there's still going to be some residual oil, brake fluid, okay, left in this hose when I take it off. So there is still going to be a little bit of a mess. But what I've done is, by putting this hose into fluid, I cannot introduce any air into my system. Again, I would not normally do this. I wouldn't normally do this, but by taking some of that fluid out of the back of my caliper, now I can add a little bit of fresh fluid to my braking system, which is good. I'm going to flush out the brake system, just not on camera, because it's quite time consuming, and you really need two people. Okay, I can do it by myself, but it's so much better to do it with two people. So now, if you guys see here in the bright light, there's my bleed screw. I'm just going to tighten it to make sure that it's okay. All right, so you guys can see the bleed screw there. Yep. Okay. I'm just going to tighten it up. Good. So I know it's tight. I don't have to apply a lot of force to this. I know it's tight. Put my cap back on. It's just a little protective cap that goes on. All right. And if you guys can also see, I've got my bolts here, and there's another bolt over here. I've got them right out of the boot. And if I was to pull them out, it's like I showed you in the back. In the video that we watched, the woman cleaned the pins, because her pins had a little bit of marking on them. These pins are like brand new, all right? They're in that sliding, they're kind of covered with a rubber boot, all right? The best way to describe it would be like, it's kind of like a condom, like it just kind of goes over the bolt, and it's protecting it from any elements. Look at that head, all right? So that 6-point head on it that we need an Allen key for, guys, completely rust-free, all right? The bolt might as well be new, but you can see that it's worn because, you know, this car's got almost 300,000 kilometers, so it's been in and out a couple of times. I'm going to slide it back into my protective sleeve. Good. And this one's ready. And all I have to do now, guys, is flip this over. You can see my piston right here. So take a look at the piston. And what I've got to do now is I'm just going to add a little bit of lubricant to my circle on my piston. And then I'm going to slip in pad. And the pad has the clips. So I've added a little bit of lubricant, okay, to my piston. And then my brake pad has these clips. All I have to now is slip this in. But before I slip it in, you know what I'm going to do, right? I'm going to add a little bit of lubricant to where the pad slides. So again, pads are going to slide right here, and they're also going to slide right here, all right? So because they're going to slide in those two areas, take some lubricant. I'm just going to add it right here. There, that's one. And then let's get the other side, okay? So take a look right here. Good. And I'm not adding an excessive amount of lubricant. I'm just adding just enough lubricant to make sure that it slides freely. And the clips are meant to hold this pad nice and securely to the piston, all right? Now that I've got piston back into the caliper body, I've got everything all set up. If everything is okay, I should have enough room. I should have slid that piston far enough back so that it now clears the outside pad and the inside pad. What I'm also going to do to this, guys, is again, to help kind of reduce noise and squeaks and vibration, I'm going to add a little bit of lube to the inside of my fork. And I really don't have to. You know why? This is a wonderful, geez, there's a name for it. What do they call it? You've got the iron backing plate, and then you've got, it's kind of like a sticker that they put on, but it's like an anti-vibration, anti-rattle, anti-noise coating, I guess, right? But it's basically a sticker. So I really don't have to add any lubricant to the inside of my forks here, because this is almost, it's kind of all, it almost feels soft like a rubber. So not only is it gonna stop noise, vibration, and harshness, okay, but it's also gonna protect this pad from getting metal to metal contact and getting it rusty, because as soon as the paint gets scratched off, it starts to rust, okay? I'm still gonna add a little bit anyhow. And again, I'm not adding an exorbitant amount, I'm just adding enough. So as long as I've done everything properly, let's see. Try and put this back on. Yep, I've got enough room. So I slid my caliper back far enough. Now all I have to do is catch my two bolts. I'm gonna go underneath, because if I go underneath, I'll get out of the way of the camera and you guys can get a good look, okay? So, or you can't even really, you can't see anyhow. I'm just gonna go underneath. I'm gonna catch my two bolts. And I might as well keep this camera close so you can see me putting the clip on. So I'm gonna put that anti-rattle clip on. I gotta move this light back so you can't see this light right here. Part one. You might like to see what I'm doing here in the back. Two. So they're both tight. How am I going to check it? I'm not going to use my metric ratchet on it. And these bolts are a little bit smaller, so I'm just going to use my 9-inch ratchet. Okay? Tight. Tight. My two caps for my rubber protective sleeve, I'm going to put back on. I'm also going to shine my light because I see fluid here. I don't know why. This all looks okay. I give it a wipe. I don't want any fluid where there isn't supposed to be fluid. Now, what I'm also going to do, guys, is around my bleed screw, I'm just going to apply a little bit of lubricant to around my bleed screw. Why? That's just going to protect my threads from getting rusty. And that's just something that I practice, okay? You don't have to do that, but I just practice it because it keeps those threads lubricated and it protects them from seizing. Because the bleeder screw is a tiny little, it's a tiny little bolt. And not only is it a tiny little bolt, it's actually hollow that allows the fluid to go in and out of it. So that tiny little hollow bolt, many times if it seizes in the caliper body, it will just physically break. And then you're in trouble. Because if you have to bleed the system of air, you actually have to either try and tap it out, or you have to send it out to a place where they'll just exchange your caliper for a new one, okay? That's done. The next thing that I've got to do, and you guys know this because I've only done it twice, okay? I've got my anti-rattle clip, okay? I'm just gonna slide it in here. Got to get it underneath here. Good, get it underneath my caliper. So I know how this thing goes. I've done these cars for so long. Tap in. Anti-rattle clip is now in. And again, the only thing that this anti-rattle clip does, shine a light on it. Okay, that anti-rattle clip is there to prevent this floating caliper from doing this. That's all it's there for. It prevents this from rattling around. So it kind of holds it to the bracket. All right, it's a spring, so it kind of keeps tension on it so it doesn't move around. That's all it does. All right, and we've got it in properly, and everything is done. Rotors are done, pads are done, we're good. Now, the only thing that I noticed that was kind of funky on this was they've got some sort of like, it looks to me like hot melt glue, and it might have been from packaging, but I'm just going to take it off. I don't want it caught in between my rotor and my pad. It's just going to melt. First couple of applications, it's going to melt. I'm going to walk you guys now around to the other side of the vehicle, and I'm going to show you what happens to these rotors after, you know, just normal driving. So I think since I installed the rotors on Thursday of last week, I've probably put 100 kilometers on the car. So let's just go to the other side and you're going to see what happened, okay? So the pads touch this surface here on the road. So the pads will heat up the zinc coating, and obviously that zinc coating is gone, all right? So when we look at the other side, what you're going to notice is the zinc coating is all in here. It's all on the hub. It's all here. It's all here. But you're going to notice that it's going to be shining from here to here. The vent's here. Perfect. All right, let's go over to this side. Here we go. There's the rotors on this side. And what you can see, I don't even think we need the light. We've got great light here, but let's just keep it here. All right. Zinc coating is still intact on the hub. Zinc coating is still intact on the vents right here. Zinc coating is still intact on the top here where the vents are. So everything is okay. The only place where the zinc coat has been removed is in this area here where the pads touch the rotor surface. And why is the zinc coating gone? Simply because of the heat, all right? So the heat of application, okay, between the brake pads and the rotors, that kinetic energy turning into heat, just melted that coating off, and this surface is going to be good for years to come, all right? The rest of it that's protected with the zinc will hardly rust. Those rotors that I showed you guys were Zimmerman's. They were brand new, probably, I'm going to say probably 7 or 8 years ago. And I've gone through, that was the second set of pads I've gone through on those rotors. Why? Because I don't see the need to change rotors all the time on my car. If it's a customer's car, the only way we're going to do it is properly, right? But if it's your car, if it's my car, we don't want to spend too much money, all right? We don't need to change the rotors, especially if the rotors are in good condition, because the rotors are quite expensive. The rotors on this car are about $220 each. That's $440 for 2 rotors. Pads are $162. That's almost $600 in rotors and pads. If I can save myself $400 by not changing 2 rotors and just putting on a set of pads, it's a lot cheaper brake job than if I change everything. However, as a technician, guys, I always have to recommend when we replace brake pads that we also either machine the rotors or we change the rotors. And that's just the way that it has to be done, because the justification in that is the rotors and the pads, they have to wear together. So they have to be kind of like a match set. And you want to make the pads start with fresh rotors, because now the 2 surfaces are perfect. When we machine the rotors, like I did on this side, but it's over on the bench, all right? When we machine the rotors, we're cutting a new surface for this area here where the pad touches. And by doing that, now the pads will still bed into a fresh surface that's on the rotor. A lot of places don't do that anymore because it takes more time and labor to set up the machine and machine the rotor than it is to replace the rotors. If you're charging $100 an hour, and it's an additional $100 to machine 2 rotors, and you can get rotors. So let's say they weren't $200. Let's say you can get rotors for, I don't know, $100 each. For $100 more, the customer now has new rotors on both sides, okay? And now you've got a fresh surface with your new brake pads, okay? So again, this represents probably about 100 kilometers since I did the brake job since Thursday. And again, the only place where the zinc coating is being removed is in the area where it gets hot, where the pads squeeze against the rotor. Let's get these